Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. Um, Today, we're pulling back the curtain, and you're going to get a rare look into the conversations that typically are reserved for Anissa's client executive teams. And if you're with us in person, drop a quick hello in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. If you're catching this later, please welcome. We're glad you made it into our room and glad you're getting here to listen. So today I'm thrilled to be introduced and joined by Anissa Aben. She's the CEO, she's the founder, and the corporate strategist with over 2 decades of experience guiding organizations through market upheavals, leadership transitions, reorganizations, tax disruption, market upheaval, like I already said, and she spent the last 20 years helping executives see around corners, spotting the assumptions that break strategy, the patterns leaders overlook, and the moves that separate those who adapt from those who get left behind. Anissa has a very unique ability to cut through noise. She simplifies complexity and she finds the strategic, let me say it 5 times, the strategic priorities leadership teams must align around to reach their most important goals. So today we're diving into the conversations, like I said, that are typically reserved for her internal executive teams. Also, be sure to keep an eye out for a special private invitation we'll have for you during the presentation. And for all of that, Anissa Aben, thank you so much for being here. And before we dive into the interview, tell us something interesting the audience doesn't know about you.
Oh, no way. You did not just drop me in the grease like that.
Duh.
My issue is the last time someone asked me that, I told them like deep, dark family secrets.
Oh, that'll be fun.
No, not doing that today. And at the end of my sentence, I was like, oh my God, you are never allowed to go in public again, is what I told this person. Because I'm like, I don't know why that just came out of my mouth. Okay, something that people don't know about me. I've played this game recently. So
okay.
People may know. So back in my 20s, I actually did a little stint as a stand-up comic and ended, I know, heaven help the audience because I'm just not that funny. I laugh at my jokes, but when nobody else does, there's a problem. I actually performed at the Comedy Store in LA back in, it would have been the 90s. Learned that, yes, it's okay if I laugh at my jokes, but I really shouldn't make people suffer through that. So,
well, we're glad you're here now because, believe me, you found your place. And for everybody watching, this is one of those programs that Anissa and I realized on our last live that is needed because strategy is such a big piece. Like there's so much upheaval happening. And tell us, as we look toward 2026, what do you see as the top 3 strategic problems that leaders are carrying into the new year and often without even realizing it?
3. Well, I'm going to start with one that's really on my mind right now.
Okay.
And that's assumptions, right? The assumption is, so a large percentage of my clients, those that hire us to do strategic planning, and even those that don't, assume they have clarity on their strategy, and then assume that every leader on the team is clear about how that is to play out in their roles, and then assume that everyone else in the organization will just get it as we move forward. And so leaders assume that if the strategy is clear in their head, oftentimes this is literally the CEO. I know what we're going to do. You guys know? Awesome. Let's roll. And it just doesn't scale like that. So if the assumption is that just because the strategy is clear in mind doesn't mean results will follow, because clarity doesn't always equal execution. And so the solution to that is to diagnose execution risks before the expectation of scale. So that's the important piece to me about that is don't confuse a plan with a system, that works, with a system of checking in and validating assumptions and gaining clarity on one. Well, what are you clear about? So when you brought that up, it reminded me of Target Canada. So if you heard the story when Target's expansion into Canada, it made perfect sense, right? Strong brand, people love Target, clear strategy. It's clearly worked for decades. However, move into Canada and 133 stores later, broken supply chains, empty shelves, misaligned operations, a $2 billion failure, right? So shut down 133 stores within 2 years. So I want you to imagine, first they had to open 133 stores within a very short window in order to do that full court press. And now within 2 years, we're closing them all down, right? That was a perfect example of the assumption that our strategy that's been working all this time is going to work in another country, especially we're so close to Canada. Of course it's going to work, right? I'll give you another example. And I read this, I think in Forbes, but the name of the company isn't coming to mind at the moment. A regional accounting firm, great revenue growth, but as they grew, they didn't have a strategy. They didn't check their assumptions. So their strategy assumed that the current team could keep up with the growth. And gosh, the first few months, that looked great. Our revenue per employee is amazing. Well, you know what happened. Capacity debt was just killing morale. And so leadership didn't see it coming, or they had blind spots or didn't address it. Or if it did get addressed, it was ignored. Turnover literally spiked to 25%. So you take this massive growth opportunity and you put all your people under the same pressure, assuming that simmering pot isn't going to blow. And now you've just got assumption after assumption. So to me, that if I just stick with that one, the takeaway is that we have to pressure test our strategy against the operational reality. And there are certain types of people that are simply better at that than others. We have the visionary role, right? The visionary is required. Your visionary will inspire, is supposed to, their role, inspire people, innovate, keep us running towards growth in an excited way, help people understand their role and their meaning and their purpose, right? But if you have a room full of visionaries, or even one that overtalks everyone else, and we don't pressure test the strategy with the folks in the room that are our protectors. Oftentimes the protectors are those, not always. I've met visionary CFOs, so no one take offense when I say sometimes it's the CFO or the controller, but that's also part of their personality, right? Is to pressure test and to break things in half and to say, these are the things that I see could happening. You need those type of design thinkers who can go, this won't hold water if we do it this way. We need to be prepared for the growth, and here are the mile markers for us to change. So I think with some clients that we work with, we just call that an audit, right? You want to audit your execution capacity, not just the potential, but your execution capacity. Sometimes that means your leadership team capacity, it means competency capacity, but it also just means time, space, energy, what else is going on, where's the drag, right? We want to treat capacity debt as a strategic red flag. It's not an HR issue alone, right? It is a red flag. When you see that go up, make sure you're addressing it.
Makes sense. Thank you. We didn't need three. We got one perfect one.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So, okay. Next question I have for you is, you've said to me more than once, and other people I heard you say that, is that strategic analysis is being overlooked right now. That for whatever reason, what assumptions are leaders making that are quietly undermining their plans for 2026?
It's a really, really good question. And even though I knew it was coming, there's so many ways that I could answer this. So I want to start with, right now, the strategic analysis problem is different than it used to be. But I've seen where there's always a drag around strategy and approach. And there is this, if I go back to the first question, assumption, what we got still works. Let's just keep running with it, right? And so those assumptions that I mentioned earlier also applies to every single role. You know, I think leaders tend to say things like, it maybe not out loud, but in the back of their mind, you know, if no one's complaining, people are just fine.
Right.
I haven't heard that complaint. Who said that? That's not going to solve our problem. So, I think that there's a belief that if we're moving fast and we're working really hard, we must be making progress. And so the assumption is that the subjective reality that's going on in my head is the objective reality, and it's not. And I find that the best organizations don't just track your numbers. Are we on target for our quarterly revenue? It's important. You got to have that. Certainly every executive team leader needs to be looking at their numbers and looking at their budget every single week, if not every day. But that's not enough. Those numbers, that's the lagging data. And by the lagging data, if I step on a scale at the end of the month and it's not moved, it's because the leading measures, right? Those activities like eating right, getting my heart rate up, getting plenty of sleep, exercising, getting rid of my ice cream. Have you guys tried ice cream for bears? Yeah, it's my new love. It's made with honey. Okay, sidebar.
I was going to say, all right, come on back.
Yeah, see?
Squirrel.
Anyhow, squirrel. Yes, ice cream is important. I want everyone to know. But on that note, the solution is to interrogate our assumptions, right? To listen between the lines. To speed without alignment is literally wasted motion. And I want to, I think back to, most people here will know the Peloton story, right? Peloton scaled like crazy during COVID demand, right? But the assumption was we're on a roll. Everyone on the planet is going to want to spin with us at home. But we need to strike while the iron's hot. So they invested in massive inventory and production. And then when demand normalized and they were stuck with warehouses full of excess, right? There was this, I don't know what you would call it other than change fatigue. They didn't see the data in what I would call strategic foresight, right? Look ahead. Not to say they shouldn't have seized the opportunity, but they needed to find a methodology that didn't require them to have warehouses of excess, right? And be stuck with such a loss. So I think that the issue is those faulty assumptions, and it's not training our leaders to know how to develop their strategic foresight, to ask their team about what they're experiencing and what they say, because I think we don't use behavior and sentiment data. And I'm not just talking about feedback forms, right? I'm talking about, well, Vivek would hear, he'd talk to us about organizational network analysis. What's really going on the ground with our teams? Where are their energy drains? Where are people overloaded? Where do people have one foot out the door? Who are our islands? Who are our hubs that are getting burned out? And I think that enables us, when we have that data, to sense fatigue. And if we can sense fatigue, then we can align resources and rhythms. Even if ideally it's before launching that big initiative, but if it's not before, at least during, because I think we have to assume that silence doesn't mean satisfaction, and velocity, speed, doesn't mean value. And if we can acknowledge what I'm seeing doesn't necessarily have all the data, and then dig into the data, now we can prevent the Peloton or the Target of Canada problems.
Yeah, so good. And I love that. You're right. So, and another thing I love is your phrase, accelerated acceleration. So from your vantage point, what does this actually look like inside of organizations?
Yeah.
And what makes it so destabilizing? And I think you've kind of touched on that already, but go for it.
So you're 100% right. First of all of us feel the fatigue of change every day. Mm-hmm. I really like my new, what is this called? Liquid glass update that I got last night from my iPhone, but it's doing some things that I wasn't used to already, right? It connected to my computer. I must have hit a button that said yes, but the next thing you know, I'm talking to someone on my computer through my phone, and I'm like, stop, what just happened? I might like it. But the whole point of that is change is coming at me so fast. I can't read the fine print slow enough to understand what's next. How is this going to affect? Did I just pay for that? Right. And what we're seeing in organizations are leaders are excited about the possibility of greater productivity, greater efficiency, greater revenue, new market share, right? But we, all of us, because I'm guilty of this as well, are literally layering change on top of change, on top of, oh, that didn't work, let's change it, right? And we're doing it faster than the human species has evolved to be able to absorb it. So I think that the solution there is we really need to look at how can we decouple speed from chaos, and just honestly, change management has to be part of every single company's transformation. I read something the other day about in large organizations, employees are now seeing 10 major shifts every year. I'm not talking about, oh, that's my stapler shift or move your desk to the basement shift, although that would be bad. I'm talking about 10 major shifts. We're no longer going to track your hours through this portal. You have to learn an entirely new system and thumbprint and, whatever. And so new tools, organizational structures, leadership changes. Holy cow. It's exhausting. And it leads to cynicism and employee turnover. And it just feels like everyone is running, but no one knows where. Even when you have your high performers who are showing up, they're looking for, how can I make an impact? And oftentimes they have to go back to what they've always known, because otherwise there's too many new things in front of them. So I think that it's really essential that we take on the mantra that slow is fast. So now is that it? There is a phrase. Someone here, it's a Marine phrase, right? From the Marines.
I mean, it is true that
that's it. Go ahead, keep going.
You got it. You got it.
No, it's smooth. It's slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I'm going to say it again because it needs to anchor in my brain. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I think we need to recognize that it's important to slow down now to speed up later. I have a member of my team that has stopped reading my notes. Like, she's just done with me, I think. So like, I'll get feedback and she'll reply, but I'm like, I just said that. And then I'll give more feedback and she'll reply, but I'm like, I have to actually ask her if she's just done with me, like giving feedback, because no longer reading my stuff. Point being is I have driven the team, act fast. We got lots of opportunities. Let's have a bias for action. Mistakes are okay as long as we're moving the needle. And what I'm now realizing is that doesn't mean go fast at all costs. It does mean slow down, make sure you understand what the goals are, and get good at that until you can go faster, not fast out of the gate, right? So I think pausing, clarifying roles, improving communication, resequencing change when we see our teams have fatigue will give us that better results.
Yeah, thank you. It's so true too, right? It took me a long time to actually get that piece through my head. But once you do, it's like that article that you probably don't know that you wrote because it's been so long, but it's coming out in your new newsletter about flow. It's the same thing. Yeah. I see. We've been moving so fast that we forget.
Okay. Would you spell check that, please? I look back at some of my old stuff and I'm like, oh, who wrote that? The team's like, you did. I'm like, oh, my voice is like bad. Change that. So yeah, you better just push that out without letting me see it.
There you go. So what are some of the universal challenges organizations run into as they scale? And I know we've talked about some of them, but this is like, regardless of industry, size, maturity, like, are there some that we haven't spoken of that people need to be thinking about as they move into their strategy for 2026?
Yeah. So I think we have to remember that as we grow, there are two very distinct chaotic periods that all companies are going to face. And when companies have their eyes open and they know they're about to be in a flood zone, right? And a flood zone is when you have so many activities and so much business and so much growth that your old processes are just underwater, and you're working them, but you're drowning in new business. And so it's really hard. Right. And then there's a wind tunnel, and a wind tunnel, something similar. It's when your processes aren't keeping pace with your growth. Right. So growth not keeping pace. You get the idea. So point being is that the goal is to scale impact without scaling the dysfunction. And I think a lot of us, I can speak for myself in my business, why fix the process that's not broken, right? If it's not urgent, if it's not critical to the growth goals, then I don't want to fix it. I don't want to invest in fixing it until the last minute. Well, sometimes the last minute is too late, right? Because now that growth has magnified every friction point. So the few that leaders really want to look for is just know your growth is going to magnify problems. It's going to magnify the friction points. If your employees had low morale before the growth, watch out. Your employee turnover is going to skyrocket. So what we want to do is be prepared with a few points along the way. One, we've got to watch our communication. If we have leaders that hoard context, I'll give you an example. Well, I'll just go high level. So a lot of times leaders believe that efficiency is more important than effectiveness. And what I mean by that is when we go to someone on our team and say, hey, I need that file or that report redone. Well, one of our directs, they're going to go do it, but they're going to be asking themselves, but I did this already. What was not good about it? Why do I have to redo it? If I redo it and I do it the same way, what they're just going to tell me to redo it again? So that context matters for morale. That's a micro example, but it also is an opportunity for micro alignment. And I think that's really important as we grow and we recognize that growth magnifies every friction point. It's even more important to go to our directs and our peers and say, and let them know, hey, I want to give you some context. Last week, the report left out some really important competitive analysis. The problem with that is I think we're falling behind in this particular vertical. And what I would like so you get the idea. So everyone deserves why they're doing what they do. And I think now with companies growing as fast as they are, leaders have to remember that it is more effective when I provide context. And when I just aim for efficiency because I'm busy, then I'm going to get subpar, assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us this. On the flip side, well, actually, let me ask you this one first. In moments of rapid change, because that's really what we're talking about right now, like this is what we've turned into, is rapid change. Leaders often default to old habits, which we've also spoken about. But what are the behaviors decision leaders need to stop doing in 2026 if they want to stay ahead? And you have touched on this, okay? So are there any more of those behaviors that they need to stop doing?
Yeah, this is a really good time to talk about my least favorite way that any of us solve problems, which is let's just have another meeting, right? So simple decisions can often turn into 3-meeting marathons. I'll give you an example. I've got a client that is a high growth construction organization, commercial construction. And the CEO hired us to do some strategy work. And so when decisions were made based on this consulting work that we were doing, the COO and the others were like, well, how'd that decision come about? So now the CEO is like, well, just call our consultant. So now the consultant, in this case, it was me. So literally, I'm now having the same conversations over and over and over and over and over again. And when I tell you the non-importance of the decision, I finally just went, we have to adjust how we're working together because this isn't going to work. So point being is simple decisions turn into 3 meeting marathons when roles are not clear. So oftentimes as companies grow, well, you might have your COO that's literally also taking on HR and take on hiring and recruiting. And oh, by the way, they negotiated the lease to the new building and what have you. And all that's fine. Entrepreneur organizations have to throw in and, it's all hands on deck, but it doesn't scale. So at some point, right, we have to look at those bottlenecks, and we've got to make simpler playbooks where RACI applies. Who is responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. And I am not a huge fan of leadership teams believing in that's your lane, this is my lane, stay out of it, because ultimately that accelerated acceleration that all companies are going through requires that I get into your lane to say, hey, that's going to impact me and I want to work with you. Or, hey, I've seen other companies do it differently. Can I support you in this? Let's row together in it. I'm a fan of team work, not silos. But having said that, people still need to know what decisions they have the authority to make, what the playbook is that aligns with the larger strategy, and who's got ownership and authority across the team. So it's about fewer bottlenecks to avoid that, let's just have another meeting where everyone gets to weigh in again and again and again. So I think redesigning decision rights as a company grows, it needs to be like in the interview when you're interviewing a leader. By the way, how do you feel about other people holding you accountable? Because we have cross-company accountability. The secretary can hold you accountable. You got a problem with that? I think that has to be a part of it. I think we have to audit communications systems quarterly, not annually. And that means asking everyone in the company, do you feel well informed about how the company will grow? Do you feel well informed about your role in alignment with strategy? Do you know how you contribute value to the organization? And do the people around you appreciate how you contribute value? That data tells us, we may have some communication issues. We may be leaving out context, or we've got people that don't understand the direction that we're headed. So that's an issue. And I think finally, I would say modeling culture behaviors at every level, not just the top, right? We've got those visionaries at the top, but I think that optimal cultural values that an organization has on their wall, those got to be modeled. Well, we don't automatically model values just because they're on the wall. I think that it has to be a part of an HR initiative to make sure that those values are cascaded and that the behaviors that represent those values are clear and people are held accountable to those values.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Another one. So you're answering private questions today from leaders across industries. What themes and patterns do you see emerging in your business? And what are the leaders wrestling with behind the closed doors that we don't ever hear about? Or can you even speak to that?
One thing that I don't know that companies are fully aware of the impact is I see a lot of companies who often promote based on proximity as opposed to performance. And so those in-office employees that, are there at your door, here's your cup of coffee, end up being the ones that were like, oh my God, look at my star employee. And so it ends up producing misalignment and disengagement, because now you've got your remote or your hybrid employees that are like, just because I wasn't in their face doesn't mean that I'm not a high performer. So I think that we need better objective systems. One of my close clients uses Dayforce, and they use every single module in the system so that they've got performance metrics and they've got regular check-ins and they've got feedback systems and they've got tools in there to help leaders assess their team objectively, not subjectively. So I think it's really essential that the leaders make sure that they are promoting based on impact, not just visibility, as an example. I always go back to that context setting. I think we're just living in a world of folks who we need context. You want me to be passionate about what I do? Tell me why I do it. Tell me how I fit. And I think that a annual town hall isn't enough. Maybe quarterly town halls might be. But I look at a company like Costco, who has an open door policy. Anyone, 170,000 plus employees, anyone in the company can walk into any leader anywhere's door or pick up a phone call and say, I'd like to share something with you. Now, the amazing thing is they run so well that the CEO is not getting 170,000, calls. But the point being is that they have built in a value within the culture that people can appreciate. And that's why, as a retail chain, they have higher employee retention than any other retail chain out there. I don't know where I was going with that. Did I answer any of your questions?
You did. And actually, I have one more for you. But before I do that, there is the strategy reality check with Anissa that has shown up on the screen a couple of times. Can you tell us a little bit about what someone gets when they actually jump on your calendar, if they can find a spot, and do a reality check with you?
Yeah, so I would call it a little bit of my superpower, which is I don't know that this is another thing that people may not know about me. I am a fourth generation entrepreneur. My father was an antique dealer. He had a very successful antique business and auction business in Texas. And so from the time I was able to walk, I was working. By the time I was 10, I had employees. Our early teens, had opened up my own business inside his antique auction house, talked him into letting me sell nachos and sodas and candy. And he ended up taking that money, that business away from me because it ended up making too much money. Oh, here's your salary. Thanks for putting it together. But my point to all that is I was born to do strategy work. Like, it's the way my brain works. Where are we headed? How are we going to get there? What are the gaps? Because if we can't see the gaps, we can't close them. And so part of a reality check for me are blind spots. And initially, all we do is tell me about your strategy. Tell me what's missing. Who are your people? Do you have the right people in the right seat on the bus? And what's not working? Tell me about your investment related to your AI or innovation, and how did that project go? Tell me your gaps. We'll talk about that a lot in that session. Through highlighting our blind spots, those pieces where we know we've got a gap, we just don't know how to fix it. The whole goal is clarity on what I don't know that I need to figure out, or clarity on what's it going to look like if I solved these challenges in a prioritized order. And because of some of the frameworks that I use a program called the Stages of Growth. It was based on James Fisher's research. There is a science behind growth, and every company at any given point, if they are solving problems according to the science, there's only 27 challenges that every company faces. 27. I sometimes laugh at that because sometimes it feels like I got a whole lot more. But in business, every business challenge will fall into one of those 27 challenges. Well, the problem with growth without strategic foresight is that instead of having only 5 at any given stage, which high functioning organizations will only have to focus on 5 challenges at any given point, they might have 6, one from a previous, or they might have 10, or they might have 15. If they're like that accounting firm that I read about, they had a lot of problems because they grew too fast. They didn't solve stage 1 problems and they were already at stage 6. Right. And what happens is you got to go back and fix your house of cards. You don't fix that house of cards, where you're at right now is going to crumble. That's part of the strategy work. We may not get through all of that in a quick call like this, but it does set a person up to have greater clarity to go back to their team. And almost without fail, a call like that, they'll have some clarity of what are my next steps? What am I going to do with my team? And I think that clarity is king. If I have clarity, I can take a next step.
Yeah. If we know what's going on, we can fix it.
Yeah.
We can excel. When we don't know, it's just blind. All right. Last question. Unless, and I will check in just a second to see if anyone has thrown questions into the comments. But here's your question from me. If leaders actually take these insights to heart and adjust how they operate, what becomes possible in 2026 that isn't possible under outdated planning, strategy, and leadership models?
You know what I think I'm seeing that brings me quite a bit of heartache is around how companies are playing with our artificial intelligence or implementing it in pockets and silos. And I think that the organizations that are creating an AI strategy that expects, Slack came out, what was it, sometime this last month, where the CEO was like, from day one, I want every employee to have a partner in AI, a digital twin, AI that can do their job. Their job becomes more strategic, more about customer care, more about relationships, more about problem solving, more about future visioning. And if you imagine you have a 2,000 employee company and every single one of them's job is to find ways to create more value, I would love that. That would be amazing. And if I'm not stuck having to rename all of my files because I did it wrong as an admin, then suddenly I can say, I have an idea for how we can save $10,000 an order. What about this? I've seen this on Pinterest. Who cares where it comes from? So sorry, a little bit of a sidebar, but I think that companies have to develop a plan for educating every single leader, mid-manager, and employee at some point, all the way down the front line, even those that are in your manufacturing, what have you, of what artificial intelligence does and how to use it. And I think there's 3 phases. I know there's 3 phases that I would encourage clients to go through. One is teach everyone, set your roles, bring your AI in-house, right? So that your secret sauce isn't out on the web, because guess what? If you don't already have an enterprise agreement, your people are already using it. They're already putting up your operating manual directly to a free chat GPT. So get control of it, bring it in-house. And there's 3 phases. One is generative AI. We want to teach every single leader first, then your mid-level, then your front leads. What's the benefit of learning how to not churn out AI slop, to still use my brain while I'm working with generative AI? And how can I use this to produce better data, analyze the data that we get better? And then we move into agentic AI. What is the sludge that people have to go through every single day that makes them eventually want to quit, or makes their job harder, or that report that they have to do for 8 hours every single Tuesday or whatever it is? Enable folks to start thinking in terms of how might you improve the production of that in such a way as to where you can free up your time to plan the Christmas party if that's your cup of tea, right? So then it's autonomous AI. And that's where we get into the advancements that we're going to see. I mean, I think, we're going to see so many, even residential advancements, things like, robotic babysitters. Hopefully not, but that's where we're going to go, at some point.
Right.
And I think every company needs to see somewhere within their business there is a competitor that's already thinking about that autonomous AI. But if we don't get our leaders trained up on the basics, then no one in the company is going to have the vision or the foresight or the courage or the oomph to start thinking about autonomous, because we're not even learning stage one of walking with AI.
Yeah. Very true. Very true and very good. So last question is not really a question, but in general, we've gone over all these different pieces today. And, it was a secret strategy session. So is there anything else you want to bring to the table before we wrap up? And if there isn't, it's okay, because we'll wrap up a little early. But if you'd like to, go for it.
I think in terms of, I wish I could recall the article offhand, but the accelerated acceleration also means that we're going to see more previously very successful companies not know how to navigate this new reality. And I think in terms of Bed Bath and Beyond, used to be one of my, obviously they're out of business now, one of my favorite stores. I loved those gadgets, right? It was where I first got my first, what was that daddy sponge? What was it called that was on Shark Tank? I know, right? I like that. Scrub Daddy. That's it. It's a Scrub Daddy sponge. I got my first one at Bed Bath and Beyond. Sorry. Anyhow, Bed Bath and Beyond shifted strategies over and over again. And then the stories that I read on the biography of failure basically was that they underinvested in just core execution. So they ended up having hundreds of million in stock buybacks instead of operational fixes. Despite having a plan, they collapsed. So the plan alone is not enough. It is about monitoring that burnout data that I talked about. It's about monitoring energy and exhaustion and frustration. And so recognizing, if you hear whispers that folks are planning their exit, take it seriously. Take it seriously, right? And then I think that what we need to do instead is reground our plan in clarity and execution, not just ambition, not just AI is going to save us 10 hours per week for an employee. Yeah, it will. If you manage your change management right, if you train people, if you've integrated into your system correctly, right? If you roll it out where people have weighed in, as our friend Jeff Morris always says, people have to weigh in if we're going to expect them to buy in. And so I think we have to listen to those quiet signals and turn up the volume. So turnover, missed targets, hesitations. I think our leaders will also benefit from developing a coach approach to leadership so that they are coaching, providing that context that I mentioned earlier, and especially in moments of change, recognizing that change fatigue is real, and we're gonna have a lot more employees retired or quit in place if we don't address their needs.
So I think if I was to just wrap up what you've said about what we're coming into, it is actually paying attention to our people.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that old models of leadership simply can't handle modern velocity.
Yeah, I agree. So if anyone has any questions, now's the time to drop it in. And if not, I do not want to keep any more of Anissa's time. So Anissa, thank you so very, very much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to hear what's coming up next. I know that for those of you watching, in 2026, which is just around the corner, we have some very cool LinkedIn Lives coming on, and they're not even a secret session. They're actually going to be out there in the public and out there in the world. So thank you so much for being here, Anissa.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you. Y'all have a good holiday.